This is a message for people who like to solve puzzles and interpret Bible prophecy as encoded operations for military initiatives. If the dragon is Nazism and its leaders, and the beast are the apes, apostles, priests, pastors, evangelists, aka the church, in 2024, who is the whore? Consider how the whore functions in the book of Revelations, especially Revelation 17, and decide.
Davenport and Galton really did imagine that the idea of improving human heredity was of almost religious significance, of profound moral importance. They also believed they were qualified to breed a better race because they believed that they were the best and the brightest.
Scarcely more than a year later, with funding from the Carnegie Institution, Davenport opened his research station on the North Shore of Long Island at Cold Spring Harbor. Davenport opened his research station on the North Shore of Long Island at Cold Spring Harbor.
What is the true purpose and function of shore islands like the Eastern Shore or Tangier Island or even the Outer Banks relative to what is being discussed here?
Situated on 10 acres along Oyster Bay, the place had been purpose-built for the breeding and analyzing of plants and animals, complete with sprawling garden plots, an aviary, and a half-dozen tidy enclosures housing chickens, goats, and sheep. By mating organisms with unusual characteristics, a tailless Manx cat or a rooster with a black comb, and then studying their offspring generation after generation, Davenport hoped to unlock the mystery of evolution.
When Donald Trump was president, he hand-selected 3 members of the with the intention that they would overturn the protections of Roe v. Wade, and as he intended, they did. And now more than 20 states have Trump abortion bans. Extremists that have passed laws that criminalize healthcare providers, doctors, and nurses, and punish women. In 2 states of those states, they provide for prison for life. Prison for life for healthcare providers for simply providing reproductive care, the care they so earnestly and rightly believe must be delivered. Now, many of you know I started my career as a prosecutor, specializing in crimes of violence against women and children. What many of you may not know is why. Someone who survives a crime of violence to their body, a violation of their body, would not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That's immoral. That's immoral. And let us agree, and I know we do, one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling her what to do.
I have no intention of sitting idly by and watching my husband's dream turn into a nightmare.
And so the forces appear to be joined, the poor people declaring that they have declared war on the administration's efforts to cut off the war on poverty.
Despite the controversy, the administration was able to move many war on poverty programs out of the Office of Economic Opportunity to other agencies, and cut funding by more than 50%. However, Nixon did expand federal support for a war on poverty program he felt very strongly about: birth control for the poor.
The people in what we call our class control their populations. The people who don't control their families are the people that shouldn't have kids.
As part of its birth control effort, the administration quietly distributed a memo to federal clinics across the country, informing them that for the first time, War on Poverty funds could be used to cover the costs of sterilizations.
It was a program that became abused because the people at the top who were distributing the money never bothered to issue the rules and regulations that would have made sure that adult women and men who were interested in family planning and interested in contraception could get what they wanted. And instead, it became a program that for many people resulted in forced sterilizations.
1 in 3 women in America lives in a state with a Trump abortion ban. This includes Georgia and every state in the South except Virginia. Think about that when you also...
This is a message from mothers. When was Roe v. Wade overturned, creating the current abortion ban? When did Joe Biden and Kamala Harris take office? Whose ban is it?
Think about that. And these hypocrites.
Joseph Levin filed a lawsuit against the Nixon administration after he discovered that 2 young girls, Minnie Relf, age 14, and Mary Alice Relf, age 12, were sterilized at a clinic in Montgomery, Alabama.
What would be the reason 12-year-old girls would need reproductive health care of any kind at that age?
At no time prior to the surgery did any physician discuss with the girls or their parents the nature or consequences of the surgery to which Minnie and Mary Alice were about to be subjected. The
girl's mother was given a consent form by the doctor. He knew she couldn't read, and clinic workers pressured Minnie to sign a consent form, falsely stating she was 21.
Dr. Warren Hearn, working at the War on Poverty, develops these guidelines. And these guidelines say that no one can be sterilized without informed consent and there can be no coercion. So these guidelines actually would have prevented the sterilization of the Relf sisters.
But his guidelines were never delivered to the clinics. They were being held up at the White House.
I got a call from Dr. Cooper telling me that I must refrain from any contact with the White House or OMB. And I said I was just trying to do my job and find out where the guidelines were. My attempts to find out about them were met with hostility, harassment, attempts at intimidation, and pointed invitations to resign.
Finally, he realized they weren't going to distribute them, and so he quit.
If she chooses, she will talk with her pastor, her priest, her rabbi, her imam. But it should not be the government or Donald Trump telling her what to do with her body. And think about it. The stories that Dr. Reddick shares with us, the stories we heard last night, the stories we've been hearing for 2 years. 1 in 3 women in America lives in a state with a Trump abortion ban. This includes Georgia and every state in the South except Virginia. And every state in the South except Virginia, except Virginia, except Virginia. Think about that when you also combine that with what we know has been long-standing neglect around an issue like maternal mortality.
So these guidelines were never distributed to clinics. Even the 200 copies that Dr. Hearn had himself were taken out of his office and put in a safe place. And in the following investigation about what happened to these guidelines, the White House responds to the questions by saying, it suited our purposes. It suited our purposes.
Maybe there were as many as 500 of these clinics functioning throughout the United States. And it was sort of up to the nurses and the doctors as to who got what. And they made their judgment about who was worthy and who wasn't.
Think about that. When you compound that with what has been long-standing neglect of women in communities with a lack of the adequate resources they need for health care, prenatal, during their pregnancy, postpartum.
We are suing HEW for non-enforcement, non-monitoring of the sterilization regulations. We are also seeking consent forms in Spanish and
I'm talking about the deprivation and the genocide of American Indian people. I'm talking about our women, 42% who were sterilized from 1971 to 1975, and not a whimper from this, of indignation from this country.
The U.S. District Court judge who resided over the Ralph case found that during the Nixon administration, nearly 400,000 poor people were sterilized without being fully informed. There was evidence, the judge said, that an indefinite number had been coerced into operations under the threat of losing federal assistance. That an indefinite number had been coerced into operations under the threat of losing federal assistance. Many others were sterilized without their knowledge.
It almost sounded as if we were talking about some Nazi-era plan. It really was a practice of eugenics because these clinics didn't see anything wrong with controlling the birth rate of people who they viewed as a burden on society. That simple.
In 1909, Davenport informed his funder, the Carnegie Institution, that he'd shifted his focus from the breeding of cats and roosters to an investigation of human traits. Having already found the Mendelian ratio in early studies of eye color and hair color, and convinced he was on the right track, he now began to collect data on a wide range of other human characteristics. He sent out a family history questionnaire to hundreds of individuals and solicited prisons, hospitals, and educational institutions for their records.
You can't really do breeding experiments with human beings. Aside from the ethics, you just can't live long enough to see generations and generations. So it was Davenport's genius to realize if he could collect family pedigrees, he could trace family inheritances and try to prove that evolution works for human beings the way it works for animals.
Davenport's plan was to analyze the pedigree charts for Mendelian patterns and to identify the desirable traits human beings might encourage through careful breeding, and the undesirable ones they could breed out.
Wouldn't it be a better world if we could wipe out poverty? Wouldn't it be a better world if we didn't have criminals? Wouldn't it be a better world if everyone behaved themselves? And if the reason we have poverty and crime is something that's determined by our genes, if we can change that and make it so that the people who have those bad traits don't pass them down, wouldn't that be a better world?
Among Americans of Charles Davenport's class and generation, there was perhaps no word that had more currency at the turn of the century than improvement. They had come of age in the midst of a revolution, a seismic shift that had made the United States the most prosperous and powerful nation on earth, and in the eyes of many, had simultaneously plunged it into chaos.
Think about that. And these hypocrites want to start talking about this is in the best interest of women and children? Well, where you been? Where you been when it comes to taking care of the women and children of America? Where you been? How dare they? How dare they? Come on.
During this first Gilded Age, it was the creation of the gene concept itself that ignited what became a powerful eugenics movement.
So one reason that the eugenics movement was so influential at the time was because it provided a scientific solution, or a supposedly scientific solution, to a political problem.
The Gilded Age was the first time in American history in which you had people sitting on top of the entire economy, vast fortunes made on the backs of average people. At the same time, a new wave of immigrants coming into this country with nothing. And our cities became fetid slums, in contrast to the extraordinary wealth that the robber barons, as we called them, were enjoying. We were in danger of losing our economy and our democracy.
People forget, in 1900, there was no middle class in America. In 1900, there was no weekend in America. There's not one single paid holiday. We had this extreme laissez-faire, social Darwinist reality, and the vast majority of Americans were fighting to change it.
People took to the streets, held massive general strikes, demanded better living and working conditions, and an end to laissez-faire, unregulated capitalism.
If that's the explanation, then the true way to fix that is to pay higher wages and to give people a better environment in which to live. And it was clear which explanation would be preferable to the captains of capitalist industry in the early 20th century, and that is the biological explanation.
The wealthiest families in the country provided millions in research funding. The wealthiest families in the country provided millions in research funding. The wealthiest families in the country provided millions in research funding to scientists in an attempt to prove that social problems were primarily a result of defective genetics. At the prestigious Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in New York, Harry Laughlin, an animal breeder, directed the eugenics record office. He claimed they could predict who would inherit good or bad traits by using a mathematical formula from Mendel. They were also firm believers in Charles Darwin, who clearly applied his theory of natural selection to human society. Eugenicists saw themselves as agents of evolution, doing their duty to ensure that the fittest Americans survived.
They said, we have to find a way to have people who are more evolved make more babies. We have to find a way to have people who are poor and who have all these diseases and all this bad genetic structure produce less.
And the Sisters and Brothers of Labor have always fought for those ideals. Always fought for those ideals. And we know we are a work in progress. We haven't yet quite reached all of those ideals, but we will die trying because we love our country and we believe in who we are. And we believe in who we are. And we believe in who we are. Is we like hard work? Hard work is good work. Hard work is good work. Because we know what we stand for. And that's a big part of this campaign. You know, when you know what you stand for, you know what to fight for.